This video is sponsored by Loot Anime, the monthly subscription service for epic anime gear. Hey, I heard there's a new Powerpuff Girls show in the air. That's great. I'm glad kids get to experience it the same way I did growing up. After all, the original is one of the best cartoons of all time. In 1998, there were no other shows like it. At the time, superhero cartoons were very genre-defined. It was rare to see an American-made superhero without emblems or capes, let alone a show with 3 schoolgirls as its title characters. The Powerpuff Girls were a fresh concept, but as kids, the subversion was lost on us. We didn't even need to get it to enjoy it, because on its own, it was just a really great show. The perfect blend of wacky humor and over-the-top action to appeal to just about anyone. Girls, boys, children, and adults. It broke barriers I didn't even know existed, and it made me take for granted how rare it was to find a girl-led show that doesn't shy away from femininity and still manages to find mainstream success. So I'm pumped. If more kids get to experience a positive, well-made show like the one I grew up with, it can't be a bad thing. Let's see what this new show is like.
I'm sick of you two bossing me around. If you need someone to sing so bad, you do it! No me gusta!
Oh.
It's party time!
Oh. Well, I guess I shouldn't have expected much. Reboots like these are rarely made with quality in mind. The Powerpuff Girls' brand was hugely successful around the world in the 90s, so the name still carries a lot of weight. Who can blame Cartoon Network for wanting to take that name and bank on it? It's a really common marketing tactic, and it's been around forever. Buy a name everybody knows like the Powerpuff Girls, recreate the recognizable elements like the branding and characters, and then cheaply phone in the rest. The new reboot isn't good because it doesn't have to be. Parents will buy the new merch for their kids based on their memories of the old show. It's telling that it doesn't even seem to understand the stylistic choices of the original. The subversion is lost because it's not a superhero show in format, and the striking visuals and witty comedy are replaced by mismatched art design and dated meme humor. It's riddled with animation errors, and it's pretty apparent that this is not a show that exists for the purpose of being entertaining or even having anything to do with the original. It exists to justify and sell a cool-looking line of toys based off well-established and well-known designs from 20 years ago. But that's not to say it was all perfect back in the day either. Though the original show may have come from a less corporate place initially, its success meant that it was going to get its share of merchandise regardless. T-shirts, endless toys, lunchboxes, dishware, and of course, video games. Back in the day, video game publishers had a habit of buying up licenses to TV shows and movies. The idea was that they would spend a majority of their budget on the license and then produce a game for that property as cheaply as possible by hiring small, inexperienced developers and giving them almost no money to work with. It was easy to sell games based on established IPs, and this way they could make a quick and easy turnaround with very little risk. Sound familiar? One company that made use of this strategy was BAM Entertainment, who just so happened to have a deal with Cartoon Network to produce tie-in games to most of their popular shows, like Dexter's Lab, Ed, Edd and Eddy, and of course, the Powerpuff Girls. Their first foray into publishing the Powerpuff Girls came in the form of 3 games for the GameBoy Color: Bad Mojo Jojo and Paint the Townsville Green, which were released in 2000, and Battle Hymn, which was released in 2001. These games were developed by a small studio, Sonari Interactive, that mostly worked on these type of licensed games for a variety of publishers. Though they were 3 separate games, they were sort of built as one. Each game plays the same way, reuses levels from the other 2, and has tie-in multiplayer features to allow the versions to interact with each other. Now, are you willing to bet that these games are just as bad as the Powerpuff Girls reboot is today? Well, they're all pretty short, made up of 5 main levels and 3 unlockable ones each, so let's check them all out, starting with Bad Mojo Jojo. This is the first game where you play as Blossom. Starting up the game, you get a cutscene, where Mojo threatens Blossom with his plan to use the professor's lab to build weapons. Then it drops you off in level 1, which is the Utonium Chateau. Right away, the first thing you notice are the graphics. Even though they really seem to understand the style from the cartoon, everything is stylized and a lot of the villains, scenery, and townspeople are lifted directly from the show, the sprite work and background art leave a lot to be desired. One of the most memorable things about the original show was its striking and distinctive visuals. It had a look that was really unique, and it was a huge part of why I liked the Powerpuff Girls to begin with. But this just looks terrible. It looks so bad that as a kid, I didn't even want to play it. I don't know if I'm expecting too much for a Game Boy Color game, but they could have at least found a way to make it look better, even if it's not picture perfect to the cartoon. I'd take inaccurate art over sprites this ugly any day. But there's more to a game than how it looks, right? Let's see how it plays. Well, what do you know, it's an action-oriented platformer. That's pretty refreshing, I gotta say. Most games for girls are minigames, collections, or puzzle games, so it's nice to see something a little bit more involved here. You go through levels, beating up baddies and collecting treasure. In keeping with the trend of late 90s platformer collectathons, there's a huge emphasis on collecting stuff. There's a counter at the top of the screen that tells you the total number of points in the level. Everything you do, collecting treasure or power-ups, beating baddies, and rescuing townspeople, adds to your score. And to get a perfect score, you have to go out of your way and find all the points. And the levels are huge, with lots of branching pathways. So there's an exploration aspect here too. And I like that it's not just about defeating bad guys. Saving people is part of what makes you a superhero. There are also these trading cards that you can pick up that you can trade with the other versions for a full set. It seems every game for girls on the Game Boy had to have some sort of social feature, no matter how inane. To collect things, you just fly right into them. Even the townspeople see themselves out once you so much as touch them. So the only part of this process that requires any real effort is fighting bad guys. You have basic superpowers. If you collect chemical X around the level, you can stun enemies with your ice breath. You can fly for a little bit, and if you collect Powerpuff Hotlines, you can call the girls to perform a special move that clears out enemies and deals a lot of damage. So because your superpowers are mostly based around collecting objects from the stage, they're pretty limited, and the only reliable means you have for attacking people is getting up close and punching. Most of your enemies have a much longer range than you, and it takes time to use your attack because the animation needs to finish before you can throw another punch. Inevitably, trying to kill something by punching it will result in you taking at least one hit, and when you get hit, you're stunned for a little bit, and that gives them a chance to land a few more on you. As a kid, I was stoked to finally get to play as a girl in a video game at all, since at the time, that was rare. But the fact that the girls are so weak in this game was a huge disappointment. They're supposed to be superheroes, but normal human convicts have way more leverage in a fight, and why is my only power this wimpy stunning beam? I guess they were worried that the game would be too easy if the girls were too powerful, but good superhero games don't have this problem. Take Batman on the NES for example. It's a notoriously hard game, due to the multitude of hazards in the level design, but Batman himself has all kinds of weapons and abilities to work with to get around them. There are ways to resolve this without just nerfing the hero. And not only does designing the game like this make it not very fun to play, but it also doesn't even make sense from an adaptation standpoint. The Powerpuff Girls don't need to have a supply of chemical X on hand to be able to use their powers, they were born with them. Why treat it like ammo in the first place? If all this was done in the name of making the game more balanced, I could forgive it, but it's already a difficult game without all this nonsense. You have a life bar of 3 hearts to start with, and with each hit it shrinks, so it's basically 9 hits until you're dead, and there are ways to refill it throughout the stage. But every enemy takes at least one of these hearts from you when you try to engage them. Refills get incredibly rare in later levels, and there are a ton of hazards that ignore the life bar altogether and instantly kill you, like water for some reason. When you die, you have to restart at the last checkpoint, and you don't get many lives, so when you're out of them, it's back to the main menu. The first level is deceptively easy. You just make your way through the house collecting all the points. Once you make it to the end of the level, you fight Mojo, and this is where the hotlines come in handy. Each of the girls has their own separate hotline, and each of their attacks works a little bit differently. Blossom hits every enemy on screen, Buttercup only hits one enemy but does more damage, and Bubbles is useless. To use these attacks, you have to select the hotline you want to use from the menu, and then everything freezes while the girl you called automatically performs the attack. So the one time you get a power that actually does damage, you don't have the agency to be the one using it, the game does it for you. And to use the attack of the girl you're playing as, you still have to call yourself on the hotline. Makes a whole lot of sense. Time for level 2, Bonsai Gardens. This is where we start needing to use the flight. Of all the superpowers, this is the one you don't need items to use, but it's the most frustrating part of the game. Basically, you can't walk in this game. You're always flying, even when you're on the ground. So when you try to stop moving to hit a target, your momentum always makes you slide around a little bit. Hitting a target on the ground should be a pretty simple thing, but you end up flying past them almost every time you try to move into punch. This is also true when you try to stun enemies. They're immobilized for a few seconds, giving you just enough time to move in and try to hit them. But most of the time, you overshoot it on accident and miss them just in time for them to turn around and wail on you. If you try to move in carefully so you don't miss, you take too long and waste your ice breath, but it gets even worse once you leave the ground. When you're in the air, it uses up your flight meter, which only lasts for a few seconds before you have to land again. But again, momentum is a problem. You just whip around all over the place. When you leave the ground, it launches you into the air, and every tap of the D-pad violently throws you in a different direction. The bar lasts just long enough for you to lift off the ground, fly around over a pit and desperately try to collect something, finally get it, run out of flying power, and barely make it back to safety. Or not. In this level, there's death water all over the place, which makes trying to safely collect objects above the water almost impossible. So you think, okay, I don't really need to collect every item. The treasure and trading cards don't have much impact on the game. They're just there for completionist's sake. Why not just fly past them? Well, you can try to fly over everything, but you move way too fast for how short your flight meter is, and because you're in the air when you're flying around, you can never see the hazards that are below you. So you can try to advance to the end of the level by flying over everything, but inevitably, you're gonna run out of flight just above a pit. You can't carefully plan your flight at all, since you never know what's coming up, and trying to kill things in the air is impossible. You move so fast and punch so slow that you'll never line it up just right to hit anything. The result of all this is that you never feel like you're in total control of your character at any point. The fast, jerky movement and the slow, delayed attacks always seem to let you down. The controls are the only reason the game is difficult at all, so it never feels like a fair challenge. Whenever you die, it's never because of a mistake you made, it's just because you can't control yourself at all or predict what's ahead of you, and it gets incredibly frustrating. There are these little items that can refill your flight gauge midair, these flying hearts, but they're often not in great places. Like look, there's one right on top of a platform where you can land. If you can land there anyway and refill your flight bar, what's the point? What a waste. The third level is the subway. Here, you need to direct your flight so that you can pick up the flying hearts and not fall into the lava. But there's almost no way to prepare your trajectory to get them in time, because you have no idea when or where they're coming. At least the lava isn't a one-hit kill, but what sense does that make? You can't touch a puddle of water without it killing you, but molten lava just takes a little bit of health away? The final main level is the Volcano Observatory. Thankfully, this level shows some mercy. It's mostly devoid of pitfalls and enemies, and you can just collect a bunch of power-ups here for the upcoming boss fight. Hey look, it's George Jetson!
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
The final fight is 3 different forms of Mojo in a row. Him flying in a robo-suit, him in his robo-suit on the ground, and him without the suit with a big gun. This fight is really hard too. The hotlines don't even do enough damage to get him on the ground, so for most of the fight, you have to just try and punch him to death. And it's really just luck whether you hit him or get hit. Once you finally beat Mojo, the day is saved. But wait, now you get a password. At first I thought this password unlocked the first of the 3 secret levels in this version, but it turns out that it actually works in the Buttercup and Bubbles games instead. Once you beat the main story of each game, you get a password, and then you use the 2 passwords of the other versions to unlock 2 of the secret levels. I guess this is how they could justify making kids buy all 3 versions. So to get the password for the first secret level in the Blossom game, now I gotta go play the Buttercup game, Paint the Townsville Green. It's the same thing, except this time the story is that the Gang Green Gang is vandalizing all of Townsville, and you need to take them all out. My favorite thing about this game is the face Buttercup makes in all the cutscenes. Her! She doesn't have ice breath like Blossom, but for whatever reason her laser vision still works as a stunning attack. Just makes me wish I had a projectile that did damage. This time most of the levels are different, and even the ones that are reused from the first game have different layouts. In general, this game is way harder. There seem to be way more flying enemies in this version compared to bad Mojo Jojo, which sucks because there isn't a lot you can do about them. A lot of the time these enemies are just off screen and shoot projectiles at you with pinpoint accuracy, and since you can't see them, you can't prepare for it, and you take a lot of hits. But fortunately the bosses in this version seem to take fewer hits, and I can kill most of them with just the hotlines, so it evens out a little. Level 4 is Townsville Streets. This level is honestly the worst part of the whole game. You have to fly from building to building without knowing what's under you at all the while dodging these flying enemies which are impossible to kill that also shoot projectiles at you. I feel like I'm just getting lost here. Unless you can carefully follow the trail of clouds and buildings, you can easily lose track of where you are, and you have to blindly land and hope that there's something under you. There isn't a lot you can see at one time given the size of the Game Boy screen, and not much can be done about that, but it would have been nice if the level design took that into account and not space things quite so far apart. This stage is huge, and there's only one checkpoint, so when you die, even if you don't lose all your lives, you go way back. If the level design used more visual cues to let you know what's around you, or help you predict pitfalls, maybe this wouldn't be such a problem. But as it is, it's so difficult, you don't feel any incentive to explore the huge stages and collect all the points, because it's just not worth the frustration. There's this one area where you have to descend down to this little passageway that's just above the bottom of the screen, which is one big death zone. And you can't lower yourself down carefully either. When you fall, you always gain momentum, so the longer you travel downwards, the more speed you pick up. It's a trap, it's impossible. How are you supposed to lower yourself down carefully when you can't control yourself at all? How am I supposed to get through there? I'm about ready to rip my hair out. After 2 hours on this one level, I can't get through it. Luckily, this game has built-in cheats. I don't feel good about doing this, but I'm not ready to lose my mind completely over this just yet. We still have one more game to go, so to save my sanity, I'm going to use an invincibility code. These games actually have a ton of different cheat codes. Most of them are there to unlock trading cards or to make the game easier. But there are actually codes to let you play as the other girls, play as the Rowdy Rough Boys, and even play as the mayor. That's actually pretty cool. I mean, this game has some pretty big fundamental problems, but there are lots of little details like this that show that there was some effort put into it. Even in the main game, there are references to specific episodes, and a ton of the characters from the show make cameos, either as bosses or in the story. And speaking of bosses, it's time for the final level, the dump. This is an endurance round where you fight every single Green Gang member in a row. Unlike the Volcano Observatory from the first game, this stage is not designed to make preparing for these fights easy. It's huge, and if finding all the hotlines wasn't hard enough, they barely do any damage. I would comment on how difficult this all is, except now that I have the invincibility code turned on, I can't seem to turn it off. Well, that's anticlimactic, but I guess that's what I get for cheating. So we get our code, and now it's time for the last game, Battle Him. This time he plays Bubbles, and you have to rescue Townsville from an evil spell cast by him. Instead of Ice Breath or Laser Vision, Bubbles' attack is a supersonic sound wave. At any rate, it works no differently. It's just a stunner. What a bummer. You'd think in the first level, they'd give you some time to learn the controls. Both of the first levels in the other two games were super easy, to the point where it was basically impossible to die. But here, they start you right off the bat with one of the hardest levels in any of the games. The whole thing is just covered in water and pits and tiny platforms, and then tiny platforms with water and pits. That in itself is bad enough, but to top it all off, this stage has the worst design I've seen yet. There's this one area where there's a trail of treasure that leads you straight down to the bottom of the screen, and if you follow it, you just die. The first time I tried it, I figured you weren't supposed to go that way, so I spent over an hour going around the whole level in circles trying to find the key to open the locked door. But no, it turns out I'm an idiot. The key is right there. You just have to go down there, only there's this little place where you can go through the wall. If I just spent 2 games figuring out that down is the worst direction I could go, what kind of death wish would I have to go down there and try to fly through a solid wall? What if a parent's kids had just gotten on the Bubbles game without starting them with the other two first? I could see that happening. Bubbles is the most popular character at my school, so they get this game and then right away, they get their butts kicked by the first stage. I guess to be Bubbles, you gotta be hardcore. The rest of the game is ridiculously easy if you can survive that first level. Pokeyok's kindergarten is slightly different this time, because him has turned all the citizens of Townsville against you, and now to rescue them you have to beat them up first, or they'll attack you. It's neat to see something new after 3 games, but at this point I am so beyond caring about my score that there's no point in rescuing them. And since they don't move or shoot projectiles, they're not much of a threat, so you can just fly over them. Eventually you need to rescue this dog that him tied up somewhere. I look all over the school and end up in the yard, where there's this huge sandcastle you have to go through. Well, I'm at the end of the level. Looks like I went the wrong way and the dog is in the school somewhere. But wait, I can't go back in the sandcastle? It says the door is locked? To a sandcastle? There's nowhere else to go. I can't go back the way I came. There's nothing on this screen anywhere. I guess I have no choice but to reset the game. Fortunately, as long as you're careful to get the dog before you go into the yard, this level is easy too. But if the levels are designed to be explored, then they should have made more of an effort to check for problems like this. It just shows the kind of budget crunch they must have been under if they weren't even able to playtest this part of the game. Stage 4 is the art museum. This level is pretty simple, you just fly through vents, but the boss battle could use some work. It feels like it wasn't finished or something. Rainbow the Clown comes in and slowly starts draining the color from the world. If you get stuck in the gray part, you get hurt and knocked back, so you have to keep flying to the right. But Rainbow doesn't move, he just stays at the beginning of the level. And the hotlines don't work, so how am I supposed to hurt him? Why does this hallway even exist? You've already lost by the time he's off the screen. This boss fight basically requires you to die the first time to even figure out what to do, which isn't characteristic of the rest of the game, so it feels like the first draft of an idea that needed revising. Well, I'm out of lives, time to start again from the beginning. Wait, what? Where's the level? You're kidding me. I guess you're not supposed to lose to Rainbow then, or all the world's colors are permanently screwed. Either that or I've encountered some kind of crazy glitch. But we've already established that this game is some kind of amazing feat of airtight programming, so that can't possibly be the case. Thankfully, I've basically memorized the level at this point. But if I can't see the hallway, I can't find the vent. Finally, after getting lost in hot pink hell for what feels like an eternity, I find my way through the vent maze and get back to Rainbow. Now that I know he doesn't move, I just stun him as soon as he comes on screen, and then he only takes 1 hit to take down. So that whole half of the level over there? Pointless. Yeah, hard fight. You said it, Bubbles. Now it's time for the last level, the subway. It can be a little confusing to get through, since in a lot of areas in these games, if you go the wrong way, the room just loops. But there's no real way of figuring out what the correct pattern is. There's at least 1 room like this in each one of the games, and they're just kind of disorienting and frustrating. But once you make it down to the actual subway tunnels, it's easy peasy. Even him in his final form is a joke. He becomes giant and has all these claws sticking out of the ground that you're supposed to try and land on to fight him. But you can just land on his head and fly down and smack him in the face until he dies. Finally, we have all 3 codes, and now I can go back to the first game and play the secret levels. Most of these bonus levels are the same thing we saw in the main games, with difficulty ranging from stupidly hard to stupidly easy. Some of them are carbon copies of levels from the other games with different tile sets slapped on, and some of them are new, but all of them have the same problems as the rest of the game. The only levels worth mentioning are the final unlockable levels of 2 of the games. Buttercup's final level is the Volcano Observatory, and Bubbles is the Dump. These levels prove that they really didn't need to make your superpowers so useless, because for once, they're not difficult solely for cheap pitfalls. Here, they're actually hard because of the sheer amount of enemies and lack of hearts in this stage, as well as some decent level design. Both stages are huge mazes that take some thinking about to make your way through. And the checkpoints are so early on, and the heart's so scarce that I'm just holding my breath the entire time praying I don't get hit. They're 2 of the more enjoyable levels in any of these games, even though they're crazy difficult, because they're hard, but not in the same unfair way where you never feel like it's your fault when you die. I guess by the end of these games, they were finally starting to get the hang of that level design thing, even if it was too little too late. Each of these levels in all of the games has you fighting the 3 Rowdy Rough Boys, with the codes from the other 2 games unlocking the levels where you fight their corresponding Color Boy. Once you clear both of those levels, you unlock the 3rd and final level where you fight the Rowdy Rough that's opposite of the girl you're playing as. And hilariously, all of the Rowdy Rough Boys are carbon copies of the girls you play as, so they have all the same weaknesses. If they get hit once, they're stunned for so long that you can continue to wail on them until they die, and they can't even fight back. Earlier, I said Bubbles' hotline was useless. In the normal game, it is, because she just cries and stuns the enemy, which doesn't do damage, and amounts to about the same thing as using her Chemical X attack. But here, using her is just pressing the win button. She can stun them instantly as soon as they touch the ground with 100% accuracy, and it gets them into just the right position to get locked into an immobile state, where you can just stand still and beat the tar out of them. So for clearing all 3 games and going to all this trouble, there must be some kind of great ending, right? That's a lot for a kid to go through. To buy all 3 games was probably like $90 back in the day, not to mention how hard it was to actually beat them all, so surely there's at least some kind of unique ending screen to reward you for dedicating several hours of your life that you'll never get back. Well, I want you to take a wild guess at what happens when you beat the final levels of each of these games. They crash. No joke, all 3 games just crash upon completion. I have no words. So there you go, the Powerpuff Girls games on Game Boy Color. They're glitchy, they're ugly, they're a mess. I would say in a lot of ways, they're probably actually worse than the reboot of the show is today. They have some pretty glaring fundamental flaws that really hamper the experience, and they're much sloppier products overall. I think what makes the difference though is that even if they're less polished, they actually do seem to understand the source material. If the original show is unique because of its feminine yet capable protagonists, I have to give this game credit. Most games for girls don't take their audience seriously enough to challenge them this much. They're incredibly hard games, and not in an especially fun or consistent way, but at least in a way that seems pretty deliberate. Even in spite of the awful ending, I still felt satisfied having overcome such a difficult challenge. And even if it also lacks in presentation, they got a lot of the details right where it counts. The folks at Scenario Interactive clearly at least watched the show, and in early copies of the games, there are hidden developer messages where the staff include pictures of their families. I'm willing to bet that a lot of the people who worked on this game had kids who were Powerpuff Girls fans, so they worked harder on it than they really needed to for a typical licensed product. A lot of the more frustrating aspects of the game could have been ironed out with just a little bit more time and effort, like the bugs, the controls, and the level design. And it's just a shame they probably didn't get the resources they needed to make them the great games they had the potential to be. Maybe I was a little hard on these games. I mean, yeah, they're not good, but given the circumstances of their creation, they're certainly better than they could have been. And maybe the same is true of the new show, too. If I adjust my expectations, maybe I'll enjoy it.
You're a princess, that's clear enough.
But a princess is better when she's tough. Explosion!
You've got to be a superhero with mad flow.
Now it's time for a buttercup beatbox solo.
Maybe not. Well, even if this new show misses the point of what made the originals great, kids today had different needs than I did growing up, so who am I to judge? If you can enjoy the new Powerpuff Girls, more power to you. And if not, at least there are more shows these days with superpowered female leads, like The Legend of Korra and Steven Universe. The legacy of the Powerpuff Girls lives on in more than just this one bad reboot. And hey, at least we'll always have the original. I want to give a big thank you to Loot Anime for sponsoring today's video. Loot Anime is a monthly bundle of figures, collectibles, manga, apparel, accessories, and more from some of your favorite anime and manga series, with a new theme every month. There's $60 worth of value in every crate, and if you subscribe by August 27th, you'll be just in time to receive this month's theme crate. Check out the link in the video description below, or visit lootcrate.com/Tamashii to receive 10% off on any new subscription. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you like what you saw, go ahead and leave me a thumbs up. And check out the annotations on your screen for more videos by yours truly. And of course, if you want to be notified when I post new videos, click that big ol' subscribe button. Uploads may be slow for a little bit while I get used to this new format, but I stream every Saturday and Sunday over on my Twitch channel, so make sure to follow me there if you want some weekly live content to tide you over. That's all for today, but I'll be back soon with more videos. See ya!